College Football Playoff Selection Committee releases its first edition of the rankings. That looks to be a pretty easy task right now. I know it's too early to say anything definitive, but Clemson is number one. It's uber talented quarterback, it's underappreciated running back, and a brand new set of game records on defense, and the Tigers are right on top. Alabama has the best resume, the two best wins in the country. Their offense put a 40 spot on maybe the nation's best defense. But now the Tide will have to go without Jalen Waddle, the one weapon in that potent offense for which no one seemed to have an answer. You don't have to tell Ohio State about how fragile a season can be. The Buckeyes weren't even sure if they were going to be able to play. But now that they are, Justin Fields just as brilliant as advertised. And those new receivers, nothing is out of reach. Look, I know anybody can be upset, but this is what separation looks like. The Trinity from the rest of college football. So if it were to stay that way, those top three spots look to be very easy. But the real tough part in this bizarre season for the committee, how do you separate the rest for one last spot?
This is Christmas morning for Big Ten fans.
Wow, the Big Ten is back.
Late October, love football this time of the year.
It was a strange feeling, like looking around saying, anybody just see that?
Into the hands of Mims. They do it again.
Touchdown, Alabama.
You've done it now. Going against the king. Going against the crowd.
Noah Mandrosini for the Rutgers touchdown. Touchdown. Lumberjacks win.
Off the upright and out.
That would be called the triple doink.
There it is, the ball game. He didn't get there. Notice he did. Indiana wins.
You don't get explanation. They run off the field.
Spins and gets to the end zone.
I think I'm better in all aspects.
Oh my gosh, this doesn't happen.
Syracuse has played Clemson as well as anybody in the country.
We did win the game, I think. Am I in the right spot?
That time is starting to come. Glad to have you with us on College Football Playoff Top 25. I'm Reese Davis, pleased to be joined by my friends and colleagues, Kirk Herbstreit and David Pollack. Also with us, Joey Galloway and Jesse Palmer. All right, guys, we've got a month basically until the rankings come out, but let's look at what the AP rankings look like. The AP poll brought to you by PlayStation 5. Clemson and Alabama, the only two receiving votes in first place category. Ohio State, after beating Nebraska, has moved up to number 3. Notre Dame 4, Georgia, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati, sitting there through 7. And Texas A&M has only lost to Alabama. Wisconsin, now with its quarterback issues, and Graham Mertz tested positive for the coronavirus after an outstanding performance against Illinois. And then Florida, with COVID issues of its own, haven't practiced for 2 weeks. The Gators come back against Missouri this week, and Dan Mullen's team still holding in that 10th spot. So this is what our analysts think. Our four guys, what they think the top 6 look like. There's a lot of uniformity, except for Mr. Galloway. He is the lone member of this panel who does not yet have Ohio State in the top 4. So everybody agrees at the top pretty much, Joey, with the exception of where you have Ohio State. Why don't you have the Buckeyes in the top 3 or 4 yet?
Reese, we've been at this for seems like 25 years. For 5 or 6 years, we've been doing this show together, this same crew. And I think there are two things that have always hold true. I don't react as quickly to wins, losses, bad games, good games. It usually takes me a little bit of time, a few games, to react to a team. And because Ohio State's only played one game, and because I came out of that game with more questions than I did going in. Running game didn't look great. Defense didn't look great at times during that game. And so I just wasn't in a hurry to jump them above teams like Notre Dame or Georgia, who I've seen play 5 or 6 games. And so the other thing that we absolutely know to be true, Reese, and I know you agree with me, I'm always right when we have these disagreements. And so in this situation, once I'm right, these guys are wrong, and they'll come around to my page eventually.
You know what? I don't agree with you, Joey, here, but I'm going to say I think it's very logical and very fair, and it's also very consistent with how you've evaluated teams over the years. So you have one game. Ohio State's going to have an opportunity to improve and certainly to move up. I think it's a very reasonable position to take, you know? So, With that in mind, let's look at some notable dates coming up for the college football playoff. I'm not sure everybody agreed with that, but we'll have time to get into it. November 24th, with the delayed start for the Big Ten and the Pac-12, the rankings pushed back to November 24th. That will be the first time the selection committee unveils their choices. Selection day is now December 20th. That's when we'll find out who will play in the semifinal games. In the semifinals this year, Rose Bowl, Sugar Bowl, and then the national championship game from Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. That will be on January 11th. By the way, that's the perfect amount of time, in my judgment, between the semis and the championship game. You got 10 days in between. Wish we could make that happen every year. Selection committee looks like this. Some of the notable people, 13 individuals in all. That's not different from past years. Iowa Athletic Director Gary Barta is the chair, along with several other athletic directors. You got plenty of football expertise in there. Ronnie Lott, R.C. Slocum, former Penn State lineman and a mathematician who can probably break down the analytics better than anybody, John Urschel, also in there, along with Todd Stansberry, Scott Strickland, and others. So this is what the committee room is going to look like. Now, it's a little tough to tell from this camera angle, but I promise you it's all socially distanced. The plan at the moment is for them to be able to meet in this fashion and evaluate the teams and bring out their rankings exclusively on our show every Tuesday night starting on November 24th. But Kirk, as I mentioned at the top, I think the top three, even I totally respect where Joey's coming from on it, but the top three teams, when all things considered, look to be pretty easy if we were to get to the end of the line. But with conference-only schedules, teams not playing the same number of games, potentially teams having a really reduced number of games, what's the best way to evaluate these teams in this pandemic era?
Well, two things hold true even in a pandemic. Galloway's got ridiculous takes, and Pollock still can't figure out how to get his backdrop figured out. So we just keep plowing through with these 4 weeks of pre-selection shows. So Dave, we'll clean you up by the time. When's that first show count when they come on and give us the real rankings? 24th.
Yeah, 24th.
By November 24th.
Still got a couple weeks.
I told Pollock earlier. I said,
around Thanksgiving, kid. Let's clean him up. Yeah, exactly. By Thanksgiving, clean up the look. All right, let's go. I get what Joey's saying. He likes to be a contrarian on this show on Tuesday night. He likes to look. Ohio State was his team last year. Right at the finish line, he put them where he thought they should be. I guess I'm looking at Notre Dame, and I know they had a good game against Pitt, but I'm just not quite all there with Notre Dame. Georgia, you could make a strong case for, even with their one loss. Ohio State, Joey, you're right. I mean, we're so used to J.K. Dobbins or Zeke Elliott being in that backfield. One game, but you didn't quite see that same twitch or that big play ability, David, that we've seen in the past. And their defensive line, think about who they've lost over the last, 5 or 6 years. Difference makers. And, again, one game in, I'm sure they're back to the drawing board to try to play better against Penn State. So, but I think Ohio State's potential is still worthy of putting them there at the top three.
Well, listen, if you're going to win a national title, if you're going to show up and be consistent, you better have the trigger man. So you better have an elite offense. You better have an offense that you go, man, they can score 30 or 40, because you're going to have to do that in the playoffs when you face good teams. So I want to see balance from teams. I want to see who you beat. I used to consider, and this is one thing I think, Reese, that will change big time this year, is I used to consider on the road being the hardest thing to do in college football. So I think that's something that's going to be negated this year without crowds, and it'll be something interesting to watch. But you have to have the ability to score points if you're going to go against Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones, and Justin Fields, these elite offenses. So I'm going to continue to look at that as these teams get measured close, and all the defenses are really good. The offenses are good. Special teams are good, Jesse. You got to have an elite quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why my top three looks the way it does, because of the quarterbacks playing on those teams. But guys, I think in the big picture for the committee this year, we always talk about the two real defining factors in deciding who the best 4 teams are. The eye test, who's the best team based on what you see on film, versus who's the most deserving. Through this pandemic, I think this year more than any other year, I think a lot of the weight really has to go with the eye test. These football experts, these athletic directors, former coaches watching the games and trying to make those decisions because of the pandemic. Reese mentioned it. We don't see a lot of non-conference games early this year, not a lot of conference opponents. There's not a lot of points of comparison that we get with teams in different conferences. I don't think you can give the same value this year to a road win as you would in previous years, especially when there's no fans in the stands or stadiums are just at 25% capacity. It's not always going to be apples to apples this year. Some teams will play 10, 11, 12 games. Based on the Pac-12, if a couple games get canceled or postponed, you could have an undefeated team at the end of the year that only plays, let's just say, 6 games. So I really think, Joey, deciding on the eye test and who's the most dominant, who are the most complete teams, I think that really helps the committee this year determine who the best 4 teams are at the end of the day.
And I truly believe that
here, not a lot of conference opponents. There's not a lot of points of comparison that we get with teams in different conferences. I don't think you can give the same value this year to a road win as you would in previous years, especially when there's no fans in the stands or stadiums are just at 25% capacity. It's not always going to be apples to apples this year. Some teams will play 10, 11, 12 games. Based on the Pac-12, if a couple games get canceled or postponed, you could have an undefeated team at the end of the year that only plays, let's just say, 6 games. So I really think, Joey, deciding on the eye test and who's the most dominant, who are the most complete teams, I think that really helps the committee this year determine who the best 4 teams are at the end of the day.
And I truly believe that what you're saying about the eye test goes well beyond the analytics, well beyond the stats. In this season, there will be a premium on the ability to sit down and actually watch game tape, because you won't have a Clemson playing the same team that Alabama played, or an Oklahoma State team playing the same team that maybe a team in the Big Ten plays. So you really have to have a keen eye and an ability to watch film and evaluate what it is you're looking at. I agree with the no fans in the stands changes everything, especially changes things for the way these coaches have to motivate these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, where they won't have a home crowd to motivate them, or they won't have the ability to go to an away crowd and the crowd is hostile and it automatically gets you up. So like when Ohio State goes to Penn State and there's no whiteout, what does that feel like? How do you motivate your team? How do you get up for a game like that is absolutely huge, but you won't have the external factors to get your team ready? I just hope that everyone in that room knows how to watch tape and really evaluate what it is you're looking at, because that's going to be the only way that you can rank these teams.
And speaking of eye test, how about Galloway's 2 buttons undone in great undershirt look? First week, top 25. Let's go. Let's go, Galloway. Set the tone.
I was actually thinking of going just a tank top, Reese, but I didn't want to embarrass anybody out there. I know Pollock would be all in and going just tank top, but there's 3 other guys on this set that might not want to join in.
I would not, but I'll say this, Joey. If I were in as good a shape as you, I'd do this show shirtless every week.
That's a dollar.
Let it go, boy. Flex it up. We'll talk more serious football coming up. How do you, teams that are separated from the pack, how do you evaluate that further? What about injuries? What about sickness? What about different schedules? We've touched on it. We'll continue. And what about poor BYU? Zach Wilson's going to join the show. They had a Power 5 laden schedule that's been on Mission 5. Let's take a look at the all-state playoff predictor, see who has the best chance of making the college football playoff, at least according to the playoff predictor. 3 teams have separated themselves, as we've touched on. Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson, all with a better than 70% chance. Wisconsin hanging around at number 4, but as I alluded to earlier, Graham Mertz, who was sensational opening night, has tested positive for the coronavirus. That means he's out for 21 days. Their presumptive starter, Jack Cohn, had already been injured and was out, and now Mertz's backup also out due to testing positive. So they're going to be well down on the depth chart in terms of finding a quarterback to start. But really, above that, you have Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State. David, is the separation as big as it seems between those 3 and the rest?
Well, I think it is because of what we just mentioned earlier. I think you got to be able to score points, and those 3 quarterbacks. By the way, Justin Fields, we talked about Graham on Friday night lighting it up. He just kind of went out there and did the same exact thing. I mean, just unbelievable. And then he can run, he can throw. So it's ridiculous. But yeah, I think they have, because you know you're going to get consistency with their offense. I think there's separation. I think Clemson separated themselves as the number 1 team. I think Alabama's separated themselves as number 2, and then Ohio State separated themselves as number 3. So I think those 3, there's a gap, but I also think there's a gap between those 3 as well, Reese.
Reese, I would just add that I think the reputation of those 3 teams separates them from the rest of the pack. But, Alabama, what they've done, Clemson, what they've done, Ohio State, what they've done. But if you're just looking at 2020, we just talked about just the one game for Ohio State. And while they put up points and they got a great passing game and an elite quarterback that's a difference maker, they still are a work in product, or a work in process, obviously, because, they played one game. So I don't know if I would put them there yet, personally, after watching them against Nebraska. I still think that, I can't wait to see, how great teams improve from week 1 to week 2. But those great Ohio State teams from 14 when they won it all, 15, 16, 17, 19, those teams had difference makers. We just talked about at the defensive line spot, the running back spot. And right now, we're still watching. So, Joey, in the Big Ten alone, forget the nation, we've seen an improved Michigan team after 1 week. Who knows what's going on with Wisconsin with their quarterback situation. So I think Ohio State's not quite up there yet after what we saw against Nebraska, but we'll know a lot more Saturday night when they get done playing at State College.
I agree with you. And quite honestly, what my ear hears you saying, Herb, is basically you agree with what I said to start the show. You just didn't want to agree then, but you come back around like you always do, and you agree with what I said, that Ohio State hadn't quite made that jump to separate from everyone else. Now, we expect them to. We know that they're talented. But I would agree with you in saying that Michigan team that we watched play Minnesota looked really good. And so there isn't that tremendous separation that we expected to see this past weekend and what Ohio State did on the field. But by the end of this, and we all expect to see that separation. But as we sit here today, I think Notre Dame has an argument just because they were able to actually throw a couple passes. We didn't know that they could throw the ball. Now, they went against a Pitt defense that has been in a struggle, but still Ian Book had his best game throwing the football, which makes them different. And Georgia has a championship-level defense. We're talking mostly offense, and when we're talking about these top 3 teams, Georgia probably has the best defense out of anyone. So it's going to be tough for them to get there. But at the same time, I wouldn't see a great separation between those top 3 and the teams behind them.
I do think there is, Joey, a separation between Clemson, Alabama, and Ohio State and everybody else for 2 reasons. I think 1 is the quarterback play, and 2, to me, they don't have as many glaring weaknesses as maybe the 4, 5, 6, 7 as you go down the list. We already know about what Trevor Lawrence has done in his career at Clemson. How about Mac Jones? I think he should be the front runner for the Heisman Trophy. And how about the fact that they go out without Jalen Waddle, and that offense still puts up 41 points against what I think is a good Tennessee defense this past weekend? We know what we get with Justin Fields. He was sensational, as we mentioned. We don't know how good Nebraska is. The run game didn't look great. Run defense and tackling wasn't great early. We'll find out a lot more when they play Penn State this weekend. But I think once you get beyond that and you look at Georgia, and I agree with what you said, Joey, I love that defense, but is Stetson Bennett, is he a game manager or is he a difference maker? And with Notre Dame, passing game looked better, but is the passing game enough to beat Clemson on November 7th or hang in that game? Spencer Sanders at Oklahoma State adds a lot to the running game. What about the passing game? We've really only seen him play once this year because of injury. So to me, fewer glaring issues with Clemson, Bama, and Ohio State versus everybody else.
I agree, Jesse, because I think the talent difference across the board is very, very different. But I will say this. I think no Jalen Waddle will make a big difference. I mean, you watch that Georgia game, it was his ability to go 90 and open up the game and change the game. His ability in the return game, whether it be punt or kickoffs, his explosive nature, I do think that's something to watch. I know Mac Jones is going to cover it up and he's going to make big plays, but when you start to play really good corners down the stretch and you can now double Devontae Smith, and listen, I know Michi's good and those other guys are good, but I would take my chances with them beating me rather than a guy that runs 4.2 for God's sakes.
Well, he was the best player in the country that didn't play quarterback. He got them so many hidden yards because teams would rather punt the ball 25 yards than risk having 17 touch it. All eyes were on him on every offensive snap. I still think Alabama's going to be potent on offense, but it's going to be different. and trying to get that number one seed in a year that it may be very important to try to avoid that nasty semifinal game against one of those other two in the top three that we've mentioned could be a big deal. It hasn't always historically been the best thing. First college football playoff, number one Alabama lost to eventual national champion Ohio State, 42-35. Number one seed going down, and what would become a trend for a while. Clemson was the number one seed the following year, and Jay Coker and O.J. Howard in Alabama knocked them off in the championship game, 45-40. The next year, the roles were reversed. Alabama was number one, Deshaun Watson, Hunter Renfrow knocked him off as Clemson got the national championship in 2016. Clemson, Alabama, Part 3 would be a 1 versus 4 with the Tigers being number one, but Jalen Hurts and that great defense led the Crimson Tide to a thrashing of the Tigers, and eventually Alabama won the national championship. And most recent meeting, Alabama was number one, and Clemson clobbered the Crimson Tide 44-16. So number one seeds had zero success in terms of winning the championship until Coach O and Joey Burrow came along last year. And Burrow, with that spectacular Heisman Trophy winning season, led LSU to the 42-25 victory over the Tigers. They are the only number one seed to win the national championship in the college football playoff era. Fourth team to finish 15-0. They had 7 games against top 10 teams, most ever in the AP poll era, which started in 1936. And you see the abundance of awards that they won in the meantime. So, given the history, though LSU broke the history, Joey, as you look at this season, how big a deal is it to get that number one seed in the playoff?
Well, I think it is pretty big, but I think every year, we got so much football left to be played, and eventually, we won't do it in this show, but eventually you'll start asking us who can come from 15 or lower and get into the playoff. We're going to do that game later on. And so that number one seed will have the chance to avoid the teams that you guys love, which is Ohio State, Bama, or Clemson, and get into that fourth spot. I mean, whether it's a Notre Dame, a Cincinnati, Georgia's going to struggle to get there because they have to play Bama again to win the SEC championship. That's important in this season, I would guess, more than other seasons. And so whoever gets there in that fourth spot is going to have to see Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Clemson, motivated, ready to go. Believe me, that is a tough spot to be in, but it is going to be a fight to get to number one.
Hey, Reese, I just want to ask a question before I give you that answer. Do we still allow the committee to say, number one, what's the easiest bowl game for you to get to between the two semis? Is that still a rule in the middle of
They try
COVID?
to make it, they try to not give the lower ones a geographical disadvantage, yes.
Okay, if that still applies, then this number one seed to me is huge, because if you're talking about, is it going to be Clemson? Is it going to be Alabama? Is it going to be Ohio State? You're talking about playing in New Orleans, where it's pretty simple travel, versus going all the way out to Pasadena to play in the Rose Bowl if you're 2 or 3, more than likely. So if it's one of those teams anyway. So I think it's a big deal. I think, how coaches are big on logistics and trying to get back and trying to get ready. If you happen to win that game, get ready for the next one. So, David, I think that fighting to try to trying to make sure you're that number one team, I think it's pretty significant this year.
Yeah, I agree, Kirk. I ultimately, look, I think it comes down to two things. One, what you just said, avoiding the home field disadvantage in the semifinal. But two, it's really just about the easiest path to the national championship game, the path of least resistance. If it's going to be Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State in some order, if you're that one seed, you get to avoid the other two in the semifinal. We look at last year, LSU playing Oklahoma. That was a much easier game for the one seed LSU than what we saw in that other semifinal that was epic between Ohio State and Clemson. So to me, really, that's what this comes down to. At the end of the day, David, good's going to play good, and you're going to have to beat someone really, really good to win a national championship. But whoever finishes number one, I really think it comes down to those two things.
Good beats good faces good, yeah, but it's a difference between good and great. And if you're the top 3 seeds right now, from what we've seen, you've got 3 great quarterbacks that I'm telling you face them any week, you could give up 50. So I would want to dodge one of those 3 guys, meaning obviously Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and who am I forgetting?
Mac Jones.
Mac Jones,
who's balling out of his mind, and I shouldn't forget him. So, I mean, but you get to avoid that. And I think what y'all said with travel is important, because here's the thing. If you go to L.A., you waste a day now coming back. to get everybody recharged.
Yeah.
And you know, coaches, they're going to talk about that. They're going to absolutely hate that because it's a whole day. I only got 10 days to prepare. I'm sacrificing one right now for travel, so that is a big deal to the coaches.
And don't forget, too, travel's different right now, too, with the whole pandemic issue and trying to navigate that as well, Kirk.
Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind, guys, we're kind of getting our head of ourselves, and typically when we do, something bad happens. Like, we got Clemson, we got Bama, we got Ohio State, and this, I'm just telling you guys, this is not a normal year. All those championship runs that you showed, with the exception of LSU and Clemson, usually a team lost a game, got kind of that shock or that wake-up call, and then kind of righted themselves, and away they went and won in a championship. You don't have that opportunity, more than likely, with such a condensed schedule. So even though we're just assuming, Joey, those three are in, I don't know, man. That's sometimes college football, the things you expect to happen don't happen.
Hey, Reese, speaking of travel, is there any way possible that you guys could let me and Jesse go to the Rose Bowl this year? And maybe you guys go check out New Orleans? Because we've been there for the past 8 years. Please let us take some of that long travel we keep talking about and let us see California.
Sorry. Tough
Come on out.
You ain't getting Kirk away from the.
Yeah.
Nope. I've seen Kirk every year. Can
I just say I love gumbo and etouffee every year in New Orleans. I'm good. I'm good.
Well, I want to go back to football real quickly, Herbie. You're right. Weird year, and we've seen over the course of the playoff, teams lose games. So where's it most likely to happen? Among these three, if there's going to be a shocker, where's it most likely? What's the biggest danger?
I would say Ohio State after one game. I mean, I don't know who's going to beat Clemson, Notre Dame, and South Bend. Who's going to beat Alabama without Waddle? Maybe. I mean, I know Pollock thinks Georgia will beat them in the SEC championship, but I don't see anybody personally beating those two teams. I would say Ohio State. Maybe. I don't think they're going to lose a game, but most likely I would probably say them.
Never know. It's always where you least expect it, right? I mean, if you knew where it was coming, then you would.
You didn't see how I slid that. I slid that in with Pollock thinks Georgia's gonna.
I did.
He said Bama's done. I assumed he thought that was the game that they're done in. I don't know.
You know, Pollock said that you needed a big time quarterback to win championships. BYU's got a big time quarterback, Zach Wilson. Cougar signal caller will join us on College Football.
Shotgun. As he throws deep down the near side to Daxville, makes the catch, he's gonna go! And just like that, BYU on top!
He's a great player, he's a special young man. I'm honored to be his coach.
Wilson in the pocket, throws over the top, caught in the end zone!
An absolute dime. This is as good as it gets at the quarterback position.
It's all up to us, man. It's every single week, just grinding in and out. This team can go far. We can go all the way.
Zach Wilson gutted it out, played hurt a lot last year, but now healthy is showing what a terrific talent he is. He's closing in on 2,000 yards for BYU, completing nearly 80% of his passes. Touchdown-interception ratio is awfully good, 16 touches, just one pick so far. Zach and the Cougars taking on Western Kentucky this weekend. Pleased to have the BYU quarterback joining us now. Zach, you guys have really played well. Your schedule got turned upside down. You were supposed to play 6 Power 5 opponents over the course of the season. What's it been like making sure that you maintain the proper intensity level dealing with the schedule that you're facing now?
Just not taking football for granted. We're just excited to be here, excited to play. No matter who wants to step up and play us, we're happy to be here, and we'll play whoever. We had a great schedule in line, and our athletic director and coach has done a great job giving us another schedule. And so, we're just happy to be playing football this year.
We just had a really big discussion about how to evaluate teams and how important it is to use the eye test this year instead of just strength of schedule and things of that nature. From your perspective, what's the best way to evaluate BYU this year?
Yeah, you got to look at the execution overall, not necessarily who you're playing on offense or defense, but just the consistency of a team, honestly, about the strength of schedule kind of thing, you look at the teams that we've played this year and some of the teams we played last year. We had some losses against some teams that, are similar to teams this year that we should have beaten, and we were just inconsistent. And so, the consistency of a team this year is one way to look at how much more dominant that we have been. And so, I'm excited for what we have to come.
I talked a little bit about last year you had to play through some injuries or attempt to play through some injuries. How would you describe where you are as a quarterback, both from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint this year as opposed to previous years?
Yeah, last year it just felt rushed. I'd say rushed was probably the biggest thing. The offseason flew by. I didn't have a lot of time to train and get healthy. And so, I was so looking forward to this year just because it was finally the first time that I felt like my arm was 100% and I had some time to train, sometimes to get some speed back, work with the receivers. And so physically and then even mentally, your confidence shoots through the roof when you feel like you went from being on a leash last year to, getting held back. And now this year, you feel like you can just let it rip and that you can make any throw on the field. And so the mentality just changes for just having a high confidence, being healthy.
Hey, Zach, Jesse Palmer here, and watching you play, man, the ball never touches the ground. You are making all the throws. Your accuracy has been off the charts. I think you're completing 78% of your throws, and you're an offense that you guys push the ball deep down the field, and I know you have tremendous study habits. I know you worked so hard this past offseason. Is there one thing mechanically or one thing in your game that you really tried to improve upon before heading into this season?
Yeah, accuracy was one of those things. I worked a lot with 3D QB and John Beck this offseason on just repetition of routes, just routes that I'm going to be throwing multiple times in a game. Me and the receivers working on them. I was out there working on them, throwing off balance. Just the repetition, I think, was a huge thing. The more that you throw that, come back to the sideline, the more consistent you're going to get. And so I feel like that was just a huge part of the game I was able to add by having an off season.
Hey, Zach, it's Kirk. I know we had you in the Navy game, and part of that preparation, not just working with John Beck, but through the quarantine, how you worked with John Beck. You mind sharing that for people that maybe didn't know the sacrifice that you made to try to continue to work on fine-tuning your game individually and try to be the best quarterback that you could be? I don't think people realize what you had to go through.
Yeah, I always tell everybody the quarantine was actually a benefit for me. I know it was for some other guys. Normally we're here and we're in the full off-season strength and conditioning and all that stuff. But I was fortunate to be able to say, hey, football's canceled, so I'm going to hop in the car or get on a flight and go out to California. And there was times I sit out there for a couple of weeks in a row when normally, I don't have that opportunity. And so I was able to take my training level and really focus on my technique and all that kind of stuff while, still being able to get the strength and conditioning part of football in. So it was a long off season and, it was honestly a benefit for me, I would say.
Zach, that car ride to California we didn't fly was like 10 hours, right?
Yeah. I mean, they've thought to make it, a mention in every single game so far this year. I appreciate that, but
what's the?
But yeah, I mean, yeah.
What's the speeding ticket situation there? Did you come through that unscathed?
Oh, no, I made sure I had my radar detector up on the window the whole time, so I was able to avoid a couple of those.
And, of course, he only did that in states where it's legal. Just wanted to make sure to point that out.
Of course.
Hey, as you guys try to finish this season, where are some areas of improvement as you guys turn the corner and go down the gut of the season?
Yeah, really, it's, the best teams in the country are the ones that get noticeably better each week, and we can't be content. We're 6-0 right now, and we still got a whole nother half a season left, and so every single week it's what can we improve on. We blew out a team, but there's always things that you can improve on. And so, from a team aspect, individual aspect, everybody on the team needs to find what we can do better, and we just need to stay hungry. That's the biggest thing. Is we're 6-0, and when you're undefeated, you're going to do everything you can not to lose that record. And so we're gonna keep going with it.
And now you guys obviously independent, but now that the Mountain West is back, that gives you a couple of marquee games, including Boise State coming up. Zach, wish you the best of luck, man. Congratulations on all the success. We've enjoyed watching you play.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, there is Zach Wilson. Hey, look, I know you should have seen them already. If you haven't, this is a really good football team. BYU ranked 11th, take on Western Kentucky. 10:15 Eastern time on ESPN Saturday night. We're staying up late for. Be nerds like the four of us and stay up and watch every single game. I believe in the eye test, Kirk, and these guys have really measured up. I'm not sure they're going to have the resume to get into that fourth playoff spot. If there is one playoff spot, what would their chances be of getting that higher? Is it more aspire to a New Year's Six bowl game?
Well, we keep talking about the outside teams, who's going to be fighting to get to that 4th spot if the front 3 do win out. And I think they should have a chance to at least have their hat in the ring and in the discussion. Of all the teams that I cannot wait for 4 weeks from now that the committee is going to rank, it's BYU, assuming they keep winning. You know, they've won by an average of 45-14. What I love, and just doing a lot of research for our game against Navy, they had so many injuries last year. All those guys are healthy and back, and the guys that had to replace them are also back. So it's a veteran team, a physical team on both sides, a lot better skill than you might realize at running back and receiver. And as David points out, you need a difference maker at quarterback. This guy's playing as well as anybody in the country. So I like him. I like him a lot. I just wish they had a bigger and better test, more opportunities with their original schedule. We could really see how good they are. But this team's legit.
Yeah, their original schedule was brutal. Would have been really tough to watch. By the way, he sounded just like Tom Brady. I'm not saying he plays like Tom Brady, but his voice sounded exactly like Tom Brady. Listen, I think we've seen with the committee, they started to give a little bit more respect. Remember last year, UCF started to kind of move up, and they've started to give the outside of the Power 5 guys a chance, a little bit more of a chance in recent weeks. But I don't think the probability is high. This year, obviously, shorter schedules. I think when you look at everybody only playing, at most 10 games, less chances to lose, more Power 5s with one loss, with maybe just one loss this season. So I think the chances are very, very slim for BYU or anybody to jump in that 4th spot.
I agree with you on BYU. I think when you look at a team like Oklahoma State, although we do see separation between those top 3 teams in Oklahoma State, if you just look at the path that these teams have to take to get there, Notre Dame's probably going to have to play Clemson at least once, but if they get to the ACC championship game, they're going to have them twice. Oklahoma State they still have Oklahoma on their schedule. They still have Texas on that schedule. They knocked off Iowa State. They knocked off Kansas State, which are both ranked teams. So if you look at a team that has a chance to get there right now, Oklahoma State having the best defense in the Big 12. Spencer Sanders is going to have to play better throwing the football through 2 interceptions last game, but he's finally back and healthy. Their path seems to be the easiest of the rest of the teams to get into the playoff.
Jesse, you buying that? Who has the best chance of being that 4th team if the top 3 were to win out?
One team I'm looking at, and there's big news today and yesterday certainly surrounding Graham Mertz, a quarterback at Wisconsin. Can Wisconsin survive not having Graham Mertz for 21 days? Could this be a team that finishes the regular season undefeated, maybe plays Ohio State in the Big Ten title game, keeps it close, and then maybe sneaks in the 4 spot? Possibly. I loved what I saw when I saw them against Illinois, running the ball, physical defense. Mertz was outstanding. Now, can Paul Chryst, can he scheme up a way to beat Nebraska without him, Purdue without him? I think so. The big one, obviously, is Michigan in 21 days. That's going to be the key game. They got a good schedule. Minnesota, Indiana coming at home. So it's good old Danny Vandenboom, 4-string quarterback of Wisconsin, going to have to toe the rope here for a little bit. But this could be a team, I don't know. I still think the Big Ten has the best shot at getting 2 teams in the playoff.
What a story it would be if Vandenboom or whoever else they might have to recruit to play quarterback until Mertz comes back can keep the Badgers in the hunt until then. Joey mentioned Oklahoma State, the Big 12.
PlayStation 5.
Early season losses to Sun Belt teams had some wondering if the Big 12 had a shot at all at the college football playoff. Oklahoma's been the only team out of the Big 12 to make it to the CFP. Great game against Georgia, double overtime loss in 2017. They also lost in 2015 to Clemson. 2018, they were down to Alabama 28-0 before they got their chin straps buckled. Nothing really changed as Oklahoma put a little window dressing on it, 45-34, and they couldn't even do that last year against LSU as Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson just rewrote the college football playoff semifinal record book and obliterated OU 63-28. And already this season, you've got a couple of teams undefeated in conference play, but the only undefeated team overall, Cowpokes of Oklahoma State. So, Kirk, those commercials that you hear on the radio when they try to get you to invest and they say past results not indicative of future performance? The Big 12 hopes that that's the way it goes for them with the selection committee, but does the Big 12 have a little bit of an albatross with the committee in terms of trying to get a team in?
Yeah, and I think if you look at some of the results from the Big 12, the one thing that I think we can all agree with is that the Big 12 offenses over the last 5 to 7 years, there really isn't an off week with the exception of Kansas. Everybody else has the ability, even if they aren't a great team, you show up and bring your B- game defensively, and you're in a shootout. You know, and sometimes you win those. It's like Loyola Marymount. They used to hit all those threes, and once in a while they'd go cold and they wouldn't win that shootout. So that's what the Big 12 reminds me of, and I don't think there's any question because of those previous results. There is a bias and a little bit of a subconsciously you think about here's the Big 12, here we go again kind of feeling because of recent results in the playoff.
I think when we look at what the Big 12, when they started this season, so if you come off of the last couple years and see what they did in the playoff, and then you start this season, and Reese, you talked about Kansas State, Iowa State, Kansas getting knocked off by the Sun Belt. It just puts a nasty taste in everyone's mouth to begin the season when you think of the Big 12. And then what we've known, Kirk mentioned the offenses. We really haven't seen that out of this league this season. Oklahoma State is the lone undefeated. They've been pretty good on the defensive side, and offense has been up and down. Chuba Hubbard getting the ball running this last weekend, but, you know, quarterback play has been sort of shaky there. So I think the league itself just doesn't look like we've seen it in the past and got off to a terrible start to begin the season.
Well, Joey, you know, I think in a lot of circles for years now, the Big 12 has been synonymous with bad defense. I know you and I talk about that, it seems like, every weekend back in Bristol. But, you know, and certainly that's been what's kept Oklahoma out of the national championship games, as we just saw, you know, a few moments ago. You know, the committee's job, though, is to evaluate football this year and what they see. Oklahoma State plays defense. They're different than what we normally see in this conference. I've loved what I've seen. They're physical, they stop the run, they get pressure on the opposing quarterback, they play press coverage, safety's close to the line of scrimmage, and they force your quarterback to throw the football into small windows. Trace Ford has been an absolute monster coming off the edge. They're built differently to me. And with games coming up against Texas and Kansas State, a ranked team, and Oklahoma, David, who Mike Gundy's 2-13 against. If this defense could slow that offense down and they could win those games, and Spencer Sanders gets it going a little bit, I think Oklahoma State could make a statement that I don't think the committee could ignore.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's not the same committee every year. So I don't think it's the same people in those room every year that are saying, oh, well, we didn't like this or we didn't like that. And I know you gotta see what your eyes saw. But either way, here's the deal. If Oklahoma State runs the table and takes care of their own business, I think they'll be in the college football playoff. I don't have any doubts about it. I don't think they'll be left out. If they're an undefeated team, they're going to be in that mix, and they have proven defensively. Now, listen, to be undefeated at the end of the season, they're going to have to find those explosive plays, and the offense is going to have to get rolling, and it can't just kind of be a okay offense. It's going to have to be a dynamic offense by the end of the season. But if Oklahoma State takes care of their business, they don't have to worry about style points, anything like that. They win out, I think they'll be in the college football playoff.
You know, it drives the Big 12 fans crazy, too. Is how come you guys aren't talking about they don't play any defense in the SEC anymore? And it looked like a bunch of Big 12 defenses in the early part of the season. We got a Big 10 showdown. The Nittany Lions already right on the cusp after losing to Indiana by an inch.